Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are listening to this in the world today. I hope it's a nice day for you. And today we're recording S.O.S's podcast number 5. The previous subjects were about the connection between time and space in the manifestation of splendor in this world through objects, people, works, places, buildings, crafts in general. Now, today we're going to talk about a more specific phenomenon, and the subject of today's podcast is urban emigration. So, if you know a little bit of North American history, and this is related to Western history in general, but also world history more recently, what happens with industrialization is that there's a tendency for people to move from rural life in the countryside, where there's a lot of farming and agriculture and related activities, to move in the urban centers where there's all the industry. What happens is we call this the rural exodus, the rural emigration, countryside emigration in favor of the city. Now, this phenomenon has actually accelerated with the years. It started with the Industrial Revolution, however, it did accentuate itself with the years. Now, today, if you go to the North American countryside, there's a lot of villages that are on the verge of closing because there's no economic activity. The young people are leaving, and the inhabitants of those villages, which lived in past years with businesses that could survive in those villages, they now are facing a world in which everything is being concentrated in megacities. So people tend to flock to cities now more and more, and the villages are emptying. So this we call rural exodus. But there is also the reverse phenomenon happening today in a smaller scale, of course. It will never return to how it was before. However, there is this new phenomenon of city dwellers that, I guess, out of rarity, dream to live in the countryside. And the rarity makes the countryside have a certain value, not just real estate wise, but also quality of life wise. So people tend to search for the country life. However, it's very difficult to make money in the countryside. So today, the phenomenon of the urban emigration is helped by internet, because it helps us to work from home using telecommunications, modern telecommunications. And there's various other phenomena that help people to be able to make the move to live in the countryside whilst still staying connected to the economy and to the social life, the larger social life. So this is quite an interesting subject today. I hope you'll enjoy it. Always remember to leave us your comments, your questions, and your suggestions. And thank you for all of your contributions. Enjoy. Bye-bye. Hello, how are you? Welcome to this States of Splendor podcast number 5. Today's subject is the urban emigration. So this subject is quite an interesting one. In the Western world, all around us, with people we know, maybe even the person who's listening to this podcast right now, we all dream of some place where we can retire peacefully. One of the almost cliche ideas is that many people dream of retirement in the countryside. Many people, after having sweat all their lives, dream of being able to establish themselves in a quiet place, a quaint place, out of the havoc of the cities. Another part of the population prefers the comfort of the urban life. This is a good thing, for, as we'll see, these two worlds feed and nourish each other. in a dynamic balance. We can't say rural life is better or urban life is better, for the two are valves of the same heart. So for this podcast, the Urban Exodus, podcast number 5, at States of Splendor, where authenticity transmits, I have to shout out to Jerome La Liberté, who has appreciated the Jewel of Charlevoix article, and thanks for your suggestions. Now, we're talking about the urban exodus. We often heard about the rural exodus. It's a phenomenon that started in the Industrial Revolution, but at the same time, it's still continuing now. Population has a tendency of concentrating itself in urban centers, and the main reason for this is to earn money. It's as simple as that. There's no real other explanation other than perhaps the amenities and the comforts that urban life can bring. So as technology advances, population tends to concentrate in urban areas, agglomerating talent, business, resources, and resulting in an emptying of rural areas, once teeming with life and activity. Recently, as technology has favored the urban life, it paradoxically has also enabled a kind of soft re-emigration to the countryside. If the commodities of urban life are convenient and entertaining, there nevertheless is a very widespread and palpable desire for many to move to the countryside for a breath of daily fresh air and a more moderately paced lifestyle. Now, here it's important to dwell upon the name States of Splendor. This name encompasses the meaning and function of our work here at statesofsplendor.com. If one takes notice, one sees states in the plural form, states of splendor, and splendor is in the singular. This is because our project consists of reports on the various states of splendor, on the various states of the splendor. Indeed, splendor has many states. There is only one splendor manifested through different states. So today's subject is the urban exodus. So even if worldwide cities are getting bigger, there is also a growing number of city dwellers that crave to move to the country to live within its splendor. The common aspiration of retiring in a country home has now been adopted by many who seek the same long before retirement, during their active life. So many people are now switching from wanting to retire in the countryside to actually wanting to live in the countryside. So this is obviously not unanimous. Some do crave the city life and a penthouse overlooking the downtown skyline of skyscrapers and monuments. However, as we've just seen, there is only one splendor in many different forms. Those who dream of the penthouse with a view also do crave their quotient of splendor. I will digress a little here. There is a theory about what it is that we seek in our environments. Of course, it's a portion of splendor. Splendor is a very difficult to define term. However, most people who speak the English language and the other languages in which the word splendor appears have a tendency of quite well understanding what the term means. So in our environment, we aim towards splendor and comfort. However, how do humans choose to recognize splendor in their environments? Every one of us has an interior environment, an interior life within our consciousness. It's what we think of and what we see when we close our eyes and we think. So this interior environment is composed of our thoughts, memories, and imagination. Within this interior environment, we have good objects, which we enjoy,
and bad objects, which are a cause of suffering and anxiety. We don't know really if the origin of the interior environment of each of us is the outer environment, or if it's the other way around, if the outer environment is the result of each and every one of our interior environments. One thing is sure, is that each of our inner environments, with their own patterns of good and bad objects, is rather unique. The way we choose our environments is complex, but usually we tend to seek one that resembles our inner environment. So we also tend to craft our outside environment throughout our life, and most of us have a goal for our outer environment, an aim, and our most cherished aspirations for our environment is often a way to represent and reflect the good objects within our inner environment, within our soul, so to speak. So one of the reasons why so many people seek that country home is that the countryside is something beautiful that transcends specific references to superficial immediate time context. The political landscape, the immediate cultural and sociological references are transcended in a peaceful countryside home or in a mountain cabin. In a natural environment, there is a transcendent quality, something that transcends the stress and anxiety of our daily lives. The same is therefore true for the one who seeks the 40th story penthouse in Boston, Sao Paulo, or in Brussels. Indeed, the skyline, the pulsating streets, the river or seaside with bridges and boats, when viewed from a penthouse, is actually like an eagle's nest with a view of the city as a whole. It does not limit itself to a specific cultural or temporal reference. Much rather, it overviews the city as a big organism, endlessly teeming with life, much like nature looks to many. So this is why people that aim for the penthouse are also aiming for a quotient of splendor. So our different inner environments makes us crave the splendor in the state that best reflects it. In other words, we all have different psyches and inner environments, and that makes us want to be in an outer environment that best reflects our inner states. And today, the subject isn't the magnificent penthouse view and its jacuzzi, much rather the simple pleasure and countryside peace that so many now in the city now seek, either on certain weekends or vacations, or much rather as a dream place to live in. Let's go a little bit back in history now. In the time of the development of the Industrial Revolution, Western social fabric began to radically change. The concentration of technology in urban centers attracted countless rural families. The vast majority of the period's population was in agriculture at the time, so they began to move slowly towards the city in search of prosperity. So, out of contrast, with time, about a century or even more later, the countryside began to bear an idyllic aura out of contrast with the urban centers. The countryside became the destination of choice for leisure and for retirement. The 60s hippie generation also popularized the return to the land movement. Such trends actually led to the establishment of organic farming and such kinds of ventures. So the 60s was actually one of the tipping points where the countryside and the urban exodus started to become more consistent. So over the decades, the moving to the countryside idea has become a common dream for many city and suburban dwellers. However, ever since the arrival of Internet 2.0, around maybe 2006, 2007, the diffusion of computer technology and high bandwidth Wi-Fi has made possible new professional work-related endeavors in many different places. The result is that there exists a micro boom of people who relocated to the countryside, living the dream, buying the farm. But a big question emerges. How do they make it and survive financially? So the need for a new model seems to arise. Young professionals aim to reorient their career, and so they invest in a new business project nestled in the countryside. Speaking of this mini boom of return to the countryside, this does not exist in the Orient or in more developing nations in Asia and in Africa. It's a much more rare phenomenon because the people there are still concentrating on the amenities of the city life, which offer really, really big perks by contrast to the current state of country life over there. So it's totally understandable that this phenomenon does not exactly exist over there and is pretty much limited to the Western countries, Western developed, so-called developed, of course, countries. Okay, so there's two main phenomenons when analyzing this mini boom of urban exodus. So people, for example, in the States or in Canada, like to move to the countryside, and when they do this before they retire, meaning when they really aim to move to the countryside, they do it with success in two main fields. There's often the naive person who wants to move to the countryside and just says, I'm going to become a farmer and, I'm just going to grow some corn and everything's going to be easy. So they go over there and they realize that the agricultural life that people left the countryside for 100 or 200 years ago to go to work at the Industrial Revolution is actually a hard life and is not necessarily very prone to generate a lot of revenue and therefore makes a very hard life. So there's a lot of those stories. And of course, I'm not going to dwell on those naive stories. I'm much rather going to concentrate with you, the listener, on the successful examples of people who have really realized their dream of going to live in the countryside. So today, in 2018, this is mainly done through two avenues. One is the hospitality industry, because when one moves to the countryside, one must have a source of revenue, of course. And in the countryside, with all the industry moving to the city, it's very rare to find a simple job in the countryside. It is still possible, of course, and if you do, you can use that occasion to be able to realize your dream of living in the countryside. And for the others, one big avenue is the hospitality industry. Now, the hospitality industry is not hospitals, of course, but hospitals are related historically to that. What it is essentially hotels and restaurants. And different parts of that industry are ones that actually offer hospitality to their guests. So you have this in restaurant industries, you have different inns, and you have also different food industries. Many people move to the countryside to launch a food product that they make, be it honey or another product. Now, the difference with just simply saying, I'm going to become a farmer and successfully generating revenue is often the business plan. People who move to the countryside with success and actually achieve something usually have a business plan. So the hospitality industry is the first avenue. The second avenue is tech-related. This is an avenue that ever since Internet 2.0 is really generating a lot of possibilities, because now with Wi-Fi and high-speed internet being available all over Canada and all over the US, all over most of Europe, is making a lot of new jobs possible and possible to be relocated. First of all, there's all the jobs that are made possible to work from your home through the computer. That's also a source of revenue. Second of all, there's webcaster jobs. So people who do web-related work, be it journalism or other. There's web designers who often do not need to be specifically located in one place and can work off-site. There's computer work, various computer work, and this offers a lot of opportunities to people thanks to technology. So this is one other avenue that's fueling the mini urban exodus. If we take Europe, for example, France has 100,000 city dwellers move to the countryside every year. This is the situation for many countries of the West. People crave the country life because of the quality of life, peaceful atmosphere, security, and clean surroundings. The cheaper price of real estate in rural areas enables this possibility, and new communication technologies now makes it work easily. In 2018, 80% of France's population is urban dwelling. However, a 2018 IFOP survey in French cities revealed that 4 out of every 5 city-dwelling French people would love to live in the countryside. 75% of those who would like to live in rural areas don't do so in the end because they fear having no professional opportunities. Villages can only have so many bed and breakfasts. Nevertheless, technology is making breadwinning more and more possible in rural villages. Different professions are more and more compatible with the country life. Webmasters, graphic artists, translators, journalists, IT specialists are among the numerous new freelance and non-freelance professions that are possible to pursue outside of big cities. 5G is making this a reality. In France, in 2017, there was 25% of the workforce that was teleworking, that is, working from home using a computer connection. In 2019, this proportion grew to 29%. All in all, 70% of the French workforce would like to telework. However, teleworking has challenges. There's the feeling of being under surveillance. There's also the total workload that will frequently rise when employees start to telework. Another difficulty is the tendency to procrastinate that the usual office with the presence of colleagues tends to eliminate. However, Europe has one advantage over North America in this respect: the presence of a complex and well-developed high-speed rail system. An hour commute by train in France or the Netherlands, for example, will take you much farther than the same anywhere in North America. As train line construction seems to be on the horizon, especially with new measures to tackle pollution, in Europe, many rural villages who had been on the decline thanks to the loss of industry and thus population have since seen their population rise, in some cases from 25 to 50%. This has in turn created more business activity in these villages, and thus these villages have now found their second wind. So as we see, most people who move to the countryside do a small business or a small job related to the tech industry. So one thing that you can do to help is buying local. What happens is that more and more companies are tending to be merged together, and this often creates a cheaper product, which is good for the population, but at the same time, it tends to take the revenue away from small businesses. So when one finds a small local business that is doing a quality product, it's always a good exercise to encourage it, even if it means to spend $5 or $10 more. So you can see the people who launch food products or who go to the countryside and aim to launch a beer, for example. When this new product arrives on the market, it's always a good thing to encourage it, to encourage the perennity of this project, and to encourage the person who initiated this product to be able to live the dream of living in the country life. Because once one follows one's dream, it doesn't matter if you work very hard. It becomes what is known as a labor of love. So buying local helps an economic base for the sustainable country life. If not, there's the example of farms. In the pre-industrial revolution, over 80% of the population was in agriculture. Now, the family traditional farms are selling and becoming mega farms. Mega farms are totally useful and even indispensable to feed the masses, but they also need their penchant, even if it's just on a very small symbolic scale. So the penchant to mega farms would be people going in the hospitality industry. They may be opening a small bed and breakfast, for example, or they may be opening a company that makes pâtés or a cheese shop, or, for example. They may decide to make jams, for example. Of course, these aren't very original ideas, but they're the ideas that we often see in people going for the urban exodus. So here for you, I'll go through two examples of people who have successfully gone through the urban exodus train. So our first example is that of Sébastien Lesage. So this individual was around the Quebec City region, and he was a full-fledged lawyer in practice. And of course, he enjoyed his practice, but one day he felt the call for the urban exodus, and he wanted very deeply to establish himself in the countryside, and probably as deeply to create a business that was aiming at the creation of a very high-quality culinary product, foie gras. So this lawyer in 1997 hangs up his gown to become a duck meat and foie gras producer. For that, he went on the Quebec City's South Shore, and he established himself in Saint-Apollinaire, which is in the region of Chaudière-Appalachies. That's just south of Quebec City, on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River. So, in the beginning, it was very difficult, but as he was a lawyer, he had some money saved, and he, of course, probably dealt with some banks, and he focused on making quality products. So, of course, he started on a small scale, but he had very much thought through his project. He had, obviously, a business plan, and what he did was he fully invested himself and focused and ran to trade shows, to TV shows, and proposed all of his products and services to restaurants in the Quebec City region. So he started out with just making a very high-quality foie gras, and slowly started making other duck meat-related recipes that he would offer to different shops in the Quebec City urban region, or in the Montreal. And slowly he moved over to Montreal, which was a new market. And without exaggerating, he slowly expanded, and his success was crowned by various restaurants realizing that he made a very high-quality foie gras. And by word of mouth, his business got to expand, really. And he opened a second shop in Quebec City. He expanded his foie gras production. He actually up to this day is producing foie gras. And today his business is very successful, and everybody knows his company, which is called Le Canard Goulu, which translates roughly as the gourmet duck, or the duck with a very good appetite. So as we can see here, somebody with a very solid idea who's really thought through his project can make it if he continues to work hard once he actually made the move. So this is not some easy feat. What Mr. Sébastien Lesage did was really the fruit of some extremely hard work. It's very nice today to see that he has success, and not only that does he have success, but he actually expanded on the original splendor of the countryside, and he made even more. He did a contribution to the region in which he decided to live. Today, people can say, oh, I got a magnificent foie gras from the Canard Goulu. And everybody knows that this is something that wasn't there before 1997, because he started his project in 1997. Now, more than 20 years later, he has a very big success, and all the community is proud of him, but also the people who want to eat a very good foie gras or a very good duck cassoulet. They're very happy to see that there is a very good one that comes from the South Shore of Quebec City. This is just one example, but many, many different producers have done this kind of business. Now, for another example, there is a man who was living on the South Shore. Now, he's living in the equivalent of a suburb in Chateauguay. It's on the South Shore of Montreal here in Quebec. This man had a passion for the arts. Of course, he's an artist, a painter. He went through the art school in France. And he also had a passion for lavender. Lavender was something that he'd grown up in because he grew up in France. And so on his small plot of land in suburban South Shore Montreal, he decided to plant not a little bit of lavender, but a lot. And he had an idea in his head to develop a type of lavender that could actually flourish in the northern city that is Montreal. After having grown a lot of lavender, he realized that his suburban home of Chateauguay was maybe not the right context to grow kilos and kilos of lavender. His neighbors were actually saying, look, we like lavender, but this is kind of a lot. You know, there was on his lawn, there was not 1 square inch, or not 1 square centimeter that was visible, because everything was just lavender everywhere. So at one point he realized that, okay, the time is ripe for moving to the countryside even more. So he decided to go not too far from the South Shore of Montreal. He went in the Montérégie region. He decided to establish himself in the southernmost tip of Quebec, which is called the city of Franklin. It's one of the cities of the southernmost tip of Quebec in the Montérégie region. And so he established himself on a very big land, and there he was able to devote himself to his art. So the thing is, he is an artist. That's how he is able to make money and survive. His wife is a teacher, so there's a key element there. His wife is a teacher, so he also had a source of revenue that was constant, so they could probably have a little bit of bacon on their table. Now, he was an artist, and he had an art gallery, and he did not exactly know how to have people come from Montreal, which is quite a distance away, or from Plattsburgh, for example, in the U.S., to come visit his art gallery. So he decided to really pursue his lavender dream. And his lavender dream was actually something like this. He created a new variety of lavender that is a lavender that can survive in all of the southern Quebec cities. It can also survive in most southern Canadian cities, and therefore in most of the U.S. as well. and is perfectly adapted to his terroir. What he did was he would actually select every year the best specimens that were the most adapted to his own criteria. And every generation he would select the best, and he would actually pollinate them with other varieties of lavender, and he would try to create this super variety of lavender that would actually flourish. Well, he worked more than 30 years on this, and what happened was after 30 years, he developed a very, very resistant lavender that was able to pass through our harsh winters without being covered or without having a special care. And today he is proud of having this unique version of lavender, and the whole region is actually pretty proud of it because many lavender fields exist in southern Quebec. There's a lot of French influence, but there's not one that actually developed their own variety of lavender. And so it's kind of a source of pride for the region. And he's now making essential oils, he's making deodorants, he's making soaps, and he's making different kinds of cosmetics, all with his own brand of lavender. And this is a very encouraging story. He's actually not very widely known because he's somewhat of a secret hero. But when one delves into the subject of Quebec lavender, he's someone we definitely stumble upon. So after decades of country life, one can say that he actually succeeded in doing the urban exodus and living with success in an idyllic countryside home where the sunsets are stuff that dreams are made of. We could cite many other examples, such as the example of various YouTubers who finally made revenue on YouTube or off other video streaming sites and decided to move to the countryside and actually still live there today, doing their own brand of work. We could also cite a lot of graphic designers. I know a few who have decided to move to the countryside, and because of the fact that they could work online through the computer, they're able to work far from urban centers. So, as we can see, if you're on this urban exodus train, in order to make it in the countryside, you absolutely have to think ahead, think hard, and find an actual functional region for moving to the region where you move. Andre Liebrex is the name of the countryside dweller that developed his own variety, perfectly adapted to Quebec growing his own variety of lavender. So he chose Franklin, the city, the village where he established himself, because it was probably the best for the development of a new lavender. First of all, of course, there's the price, but there's also the climate that was perfect for it. Oh, and the different snow precipitation levels were actually reasons why he chose his region to live in. It wasn't just something touristic, because when you decide to live in the countryside, you're not just a tourist aiming to go water ski on a lake. You're seriously thinking of establishing yourself. So if you find a truly functional reason for establishing yourself in a region, after careful consideration, you must choose a region or village that corresponds to your needs and the needs of your venture. So this process will anchor your life space and workspace in the region of your choice. As we see in most examples, the durable urban dwellers who successfully established themselves in the countryside either had a job prospect or had a business themselves. In this case, it will be using business at the service of the region and the community you will be joining. In the past century, our cities, communities, and countries were shaped by people following an idea, a venture. They made infrastructures and they actually shaped the tissue of our living space. At that time, much of it was agricultural or natural resource extraction. Today, with this recent wave of people establishing themselves in the countryside, Let's hope that we actually use technology for the good of the communities in which we decide to dwell. Let's hope we have an influence that respects nature and ultimately contributes constructively to the host communities. So if you have different projects of establishing yourself in the countryside, I'd like to know two things. First of all, what is your venture? How will you sustain yourself in the countryside? And second of all, what do you find that is so splendid in the countryside? What is something you find beautiful in the countryside? Why do you dream the dream you dream? Please send me this at info@statesofsplendor.com. That's STATESOFSPLENDOR.com. I'll be happy to read your news, comments, and or questions. So until next podcast, this is Patrick Asikian. Have a very good week. Bye-bye.